Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder, coming to you from the Peach Gallery in downtown Toronto. Today on The Point, Bonnie Crombie takes the reins from Canada's longest-serving mayor. And I'm joined by a panel of experts to review the biggest political news stories of 2014. All that and more on this edition of The Point. It's the beginning of a new era in Mississauga. On December 2nd, Bonnie Crombie was sworn in as mayor. She is the city's first new mayor since 1978. Crombie takes over for Mayor Hazel McCallion. McCallion was Canada's longest-serving mayor. She helmed the city for 36 years. Mayor Crombie now faces a new set of challenges, with the city facing a $1.5 billion infrastructure deficit and a need for more transit. Joining me is newly minted Mississauga Mayor, Bonnie Crombie. Thank you for joining us, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Marcel, for having me today.
Madam Mayor, the election was thought to be a very close one that people were predicting would go right down to the wire. And at the end of the day, you came in with a more than 2-to-1 majority.
63.5%, actually, a popular vote. Yes, it was quite an experience. Of course, I was always cautiously optimistic, but you just never know. You have to continue to work hard. I always work as though I'm the underdog.
Now, you were a federal MP for Mississauga-Streetsville, City Councilor, Ward 5, and now you're the mayor of Mississauga. What was it like campaigning across the city?
Well, it's a completely different experience. You know, certainly when you're in a riding race or in a ward race for a city, it's very defined, and you can go out and you can knock on every single door, which is what you should do in an election campaign. But that's not the case in a mayoral race. It's 6 ridings or 11 wards. It's too massive an undertaking. So whereas I did knock on some doors, we had canvas blitzes on Saturdays and Sundays. For the most part, it's name recognition and name brand awareness. So you try and attend as many possible events as you can. You get out and meet as many people as you can. So you tend to attend events that are, have a lot of attendees, participants. So if there are 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 people, I would be there. I would be at the GO trains in the morning, shaking hands and handing out literature. I'd go to wherever there was a large crowd. It became known as going to the opening of a door.
Now, a lot of people attribute your win to Mayor McCallion's support of your platform. Yet, when we look at the advance polls, we saw that you were clearly ahead of your opponent, and that was well before Mayor McCallion made her statement.
Well, a couple of things in there. Certainly, we never felt like we were behind, even though you always run like you're behind. I was always receiving positive feedback. I've yet to meet that person that said, sorry, we're with the other guy. But the polls were showing us neck and neck, and I respect that. And polls, as we know, is just a snapshot of one particular day. And certainly, there's new technology now, IVR.
Interactive voice recognition.
And I understand that the demographic that tends to respond to those IVRs is an older demographic with a landline. And many of my voters are very much from the diverse communities, and people have younger generation that have cell phones. So when you look at the people who respond to those IVRs, they tend to be an older demographic. So in my mind, he and I were tied with his demographic rather than broadly. So I knew that we were safe, but you still have to work hard. And certainly when the results of the advance polls were read, it was clear that we had won the advance polls by 10%. And let me just share with you that those advance polls were taken in September and October, and the final advance poll, and this is an important date, was Saturday, October 10th. Well, Mayor McCallion made her supportive statements. We won't call it an endorsement because she supported the ideas in my platform.
Right.
She said she would only wade into the debate should one platform be detrimental to the city. So I guess she deemed one of the other platforms detrimental to the city. So she came out and supported mine and the ideas. And that was at a dinner on Friday, October 9th. So that happened. And Saturday, October 10th was the final advance poll. And we released that video on Sunday the 11th. So people who already voted in the advance polls had no idea that Hazel McCallion was going to be behind my platform.
So now you're in the mayor's office and you have the chain of office and all the responsibilities that go with it. What are your priorities for the next few years?
And let me just address the chain of office, if I may. So they retired the chain that Hazel had worn. It had a little bit of wear and tear after 36 years. And they made me a beautiful, brand new, kind of modern, but lovely, lovely chain I'll wear proudly. So very much, just like Toronto and the other cities in the GTA, we have to focus on transit and transportation and addressing our gridlock and congestion. So it's building that regionally integrated transit network. For us, it's completing our bus rapid transit way and beginning the spine of the north-south part of our transit plan, which is the light rail transit along here, Ontario. So those are some of the ways we'll address our congestion and gridlock through improved and enhanced transit, including our MyWay bus transit as well. Certainly through economic development, expanding our economic base. That's a program to retain the businesses we have, expand the businesses we have, and as well go abroad to look for foreign direct investment. I'll be very actively looking for investment. We've planned a number of trade missions already, India, Pakistan, Poland. And we have a highly skilled work base in Mississauga, highly skilled resident base that speak 70 languages that come from 150 different countries. So we're going to leverage their talents, their skills, and their business networks abroad to bring in some of that investment. And I'm creating an international investment advisory panel to leverage that as well. But in addition, I've announced the mayor's task force on the innovation agenda to promote us as a hub of innovation and ideas. So our local entrepreneurs can take their ideas from concept to commercialization right in Mississauga. And I really want us to become that hub of innovation and entrepreneurship. So those are three of the most critical areas. I want to also address the youth job challenge. We have 20% youth unemployment in the Peel region, and I will be issuing the Mayor's Job Youth Challenge. And then finally, Marcel, is of course the issue of respecting taxpayers and tax increases. And I've made a commitment to keep taxes to the rate of inflation. And we're undertaking budget season right now.
On that point, and you have outlined a very ambitious agenda for the next little while, how do you see being able to keep taxes low and being able to deliver on the commitments that you've made?
Well, certainly, I'm going to work with the council. We have a new dynamic. We have a lot of consensus. And I've already had a preliminary look at our budget, and it's very realistic for us to come in at the rate of inflation this year. And so, I welcome all the new initiatives the other councillors are bringing to the table. I've met with each and every one of them to understand their priorities.
Well, speaking of that, there's a story going around that says that you baked personally cookies and delivered them to each of the councillors. Is that true, Madam Mayor?
It's half true. I didn't actually bake the cookies, but I did receive as a Christmas gift a beautiful platter of cookies. And it happened to be on a day where I knew that all the new councillors were in their offices, and I wanted to meet with them individually and welcome them and wanted to meet with their new staff. And so I took the platter of cookies and went door by door, councillor by councillor, ward office by ward office, and brought my staff with me, and I introduced my new members, and we introduced each other, and I welcomed them, and just, we shared all the cookies. So certainly.
Well, it's certainly a creative way of breaking the ice.
Exactly.
With the new council.
Exactly. And one of my priorities was to create a consensus among councillors and to meet with them individually and ask what their priorities are, much the way you do in the business world. What's your agenda? What are your goals and objectives for this year? How can I help you be successful? And then, of course, I don't measure them. Their direct employers, the voters do, their residents do. And I asked as well, what they wanted to be known for as a council. So what are your goals and objectives for your ward? And what do you want us to be known for? What should we have accomplished in this 4 years? And there was a lot of synergy and similarity in their responses. So I was very delighted about that. And I feel very strongly they're going to work as a team. So I'm very pleased about that. And they welcomed the approach and said that they were just delighted at being asked their opinion and what they wanted to accomplish.
Well, certainly there's going to be a different attitude and a different style at City Hall in Mississauga after 36 years of having Mayor McCallion. It's now Mayor Crombie. People are going to have to get used to that. Mayor Crombie, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us and sharing some of your views. We look forward to having you back in the new year.
Thank you so much, Marcel. Thank you for having me.
Up next on The Point, we look at the top political stories of 2014 with our panel. Welcome back to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder. 2014 has been a challenging year at all three levels of government. The Senate expense scandal has continued to plague the Harper government as they await the results of Auditor General Michael Ferguson's review of senators' spending habits. The Ontario Liberal Party took a firm hold in the province in the June 12th election. The Liberals swept back into power and gained 9 seats. Municipally, John Tory has replaced Rob Ford as Chief Magistrate of Toronto. And as the calendar turns towards the new year, we look at federal and provincial elections. We have two of the best political commentators joining us. Sheila White and John Mykytyshyn are back today to talk about the year's biggest political moves and what 2015 will hold. Welcome, John, Sheila. So let's talk at the beginning with the federal scene. What are the top stories? Was it the Senate scandal with Duffy, Brazeau, Wallin? Was it what's happening internationally with Harper? What do you see as the big stories? Sheila, let's start it off.
The Senate scandal was huge and certainly pointed to the lack of judgment on the part of the Prime Minister to have handpicked these individuals who then raided the public purse and didn't follow any of the rules. That was a huge story, but I think even more the sexual harassment allegations that came out near the end of this year. Again, a judgment question and how Justin Trudeau handled that matter. Did he respect the confidentiality of the women involved? Did he rush to judgment without hearing all the facts first? And there's still plenty more to go on the harassment file.
And John, what do you see as the top story?
I think it's actually how a year ago people were talking about when the Prime Minister would retire, if it would be before the next election potentially. And I think the Conservatives have been pretty solid in the last year, and it's changed. I mean, there's been a lot of issues, and certainly the Liberal mismanagement of their issues has taken a certain amount of the airplay. But I think it's the Conservatives being able to be stronger now, a year closer to an election than they were a year ago, despite all the things that have happened. A tremendous amount of stuff has happened that could have potentially driven their numbers down. But they're not only weathering them, they're bouncing back.
Well, let's look at the by-elections that took place over the past year. In NDP held seats, they lost in Trinity Spadina. They also lost in Toronto Centre Rosedale. Came third in the recent Whitby by-election. And for the Tories, the Liberals came very close in Manitoba as well as in Alberta. So what is that? Is that a portent of what might happen?
I think it is. And when I say it is in that they came close. And as you know, in politics, there's no prize for second. If you lose by one vote, you might as well have lost by 100,000. So the reality is, for for the Liberals to be that close in ridings, where one would think going against majority government, during the term, they should have been able to take those seats or do better than they did. So I'm suggesting that the fact that the Liberals did as poorly as they did in the by-elections actually means that it's a good sign for things to come for the Conservatives next year.
How did they do poorly if they've won a number of by-elections?
Well, they should have won them all.
Including Alberta?
Sure,
Hard
why
Rock,
not?
Tory
Absolutely.
country?
You know, by-elections really don't mean that much. You're putting way too much stock in it. It's when the big event happens, the national election, and the focus is on the large issues. That's when people, come out with their true colors. Sometimes a by-election vote can be just a protest vote, an I don't care vote, I'm unhappy with this person's vote. It can be on a very personal or local level. So I don't think you can read too much into that. What I think the Conservatives have been most skilled at in the past year, as you say, Mr. Harper seems to be coming up, but what they're really good at doing is papering over all these serious issues and problems that we have in Canada and putting out crafty ads and expensive propaganda campaigns to convince Canadians somehow that there is movement on these files when there's absolutely nothing happening.
John, Michael Sona was convicted and is actually being sent to jail for his role in the Guelph robocall scandal. Now, that was something that was apparently directed from the Conservative Party to misinform voters in that riding as to where they should actually vote. How is that playing out?
I really caution you on the words you just used, because I think the judge made it clear that there were no connections to anybody other than to the guy that was convicted. There was no proof of anything else. There was no direction. There was no ties or other charges would have been forthcoming. I think what happened is you had one young, misguided, rogue guy do something terrible in a democratic context, and he's paying the price. And I think the judge quite accurately and fairly gave him a very harsh sentence.
But this is not the first time that the Conservatives have been convicted of violating election laws. The In-N-Out scandal, where they were rapped hard by Elections Canada and then convicted and had to pay a fine on that.
I don't believe they were convicted of anything.
Oh, yeah, they were convicted and they had to pay a fine.
Hang on a second. They were convicted by a judge?
The plea bargain. They
right.
agreed to
So
guilt.
That's my point. They were never convicted of anything on the In-N-Out scandal. What they did was they had an interpretation of the rules that disagreed with Elections Canada, and what they did is they came to an agreement on how to settle the issue.
Marcel, I think what you're raising speaks to the way Conservatives do politics. And from what I've seen, it's win at all costs, do whatever it takes to win. And if there's a line you have to cross, go ahead and cross it, because the chances of any enforcement in this country around election laws is pretty slim. And if you get wind that there's a few rogues out there who are tampering with the democratic process, well, you just look the other way. I can't believe that this is just one sole agent who got the idea all on his own to rig these calls. The pattern was too repetitive.
Well, Sheila, to be fair, I've never thought of you as a conspiracy theorist. But at the end of the day, I think there may have been a second person, and the Crown kind of interestingly did a plea bargain and gave him immunity.
That's right.
I'm saying it's a culture, though. I'm saying it's a culture within the Conservative Party, with election financing, with these other types of robocalling and those types of tactics.
I think you're really painting a brush way too broadly. It's like
Mike Duffy, Pamela
it's like saying the
Wallin,
entire Liberal Party is guilty for the actions of a couple of their members on sexual harassment issues.
I'm just asking viewers to look at a pattern over time.
I don't think you can find a pattern when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of members of a party versus the actions and the conviction of one person.
So let's shift our focus a little more locally and Ontario. And I guess the big story was the June 12th election that saw Kathleen win and the Ontario Liberal parties form a majority government. I don't think anyone saw that at the beginning of the election.
Not a majority, no.
Not a majority. So let's have some comments. We'll start with you, Sheila.
As I'm shaking my head, I rue that day. That was the election that was never supposed to have happened. As we all know, there are fixed election dates in Ontario. And that date would have been, I think, October 2015, sort of paralleled with the federal. So maybe it's good that it happened early, so there wasn't that traditional overlay of competing election signs. But the NDP lost ground and lost a huge opportunity to work with Kathleen Wynne in a minority position and get a lot more done. And at the same time, get prepared for a true election campaign, because I think what we saw in June was a relatively half-baked, laid out of the starting gate and not all that cohesive.
Yeah, there were really two big shocking results. Well, three. So from the Liberal perspective, they won a majority. But other than that, nothing really shocking out of the Liberal campaign. They ran a very competent campaign. The two other shocking things were that, frankly, the NDP didn't have a campaign, and nobody would have ever thought that Andrea would have run that bad a campaign. And then the third thing being that Tim Hudak would run the exact same campaign he ran the time before and would come up with something that the Conservatives, you would think at this point in time, have tried and true to fail, which is come up with an issue in the middle of a campaign that they weren't talking about months before a campaign, which then tanks their own campaign.
Just ask John Tory.
John, the Tories have dumped Tim Hudak. He resigned just a few days after the results of the election, and you're into a full-fledged leadership campaign. I think it's May the 9th is the date, and there's 6 candidates vying.
5 at the moment.
Oh, 5, sorry.
Well, technically 4 at the time of the taping. There may be a 5th one. The deadline isn't until January 28th. To which the biggest news in the last of the race so far would be the fact that Doug Ford decided not to run.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, the deadline for filing is January 28th, and it wouldn't be the first time if he changed his mind that someone decided to not run for the leadership of the Conservative Party and then changed their mind, ran and won the race. Frank Miller would have done that back in the 80s. So it's not over until it's over. It's an exciting race. It's interesting. The last leadership was the shortest one in Conservative Party history. And the executive now has decided to take a different tack, and we're now into the longest race in the history of the Conservative Party of Ontario. So it's going to be an interesting marathon.
And who do you see emerging at the front of the pack? A lot of people say it's Christine Elliott. Others are say it's Patrick Brown.
So I'll declare a bias up front. Patrick Brown is both a close personal friend, and I'm working on his campaign. That being said, I don't think anybody would argue that Christine isn't the front runner at this point in time. She was the deputy leader, shoulder to shoulder, side by side with Tim Hudak for 5 years. She was the first to declare her ambition for the leadership this time around by a couple of months. And she has a network and an organization from last time. So despite the fact there's been some upheaval on her campaign, I think you've got to absolutely say she's the front runner. I think Patrick Brown has surprised many people by coming out and being as strong as he is. I would say he's in second place. There's no polling or anything that's reputable around any analysis, so it's all anecdotal at this point in time. And then I think Vic Fideli and Lisa MacLeod are fighting for third. And it's going to be interesting to see what the themes are. I mean, you've got two candidates that are young and energetic, and then you'd have two candidates claiming to be older and energetic.
So now let's look at the City of Toronto. And finally, the Ford circus, at least the Rob Ford circus as mayor, has come to an end. John Tory has finally claimed victory in a race. He ran once before for mayor, he ran for premier, and now he's run again for mayor, and he's finally third time lucky. I think that's the big story in the City of Toronto. Comments, Sheila?
Well, I think largely Toronto feels a great sense of relief having a mayor who can deal with issues and hold a press conference and actually have it mean something, a tangible idea, and not just the baffle gab and the contentious bare-fisted fighting all the time that the Fords were noted for. However, I do think he's got a way to go on bringing the council together. It seems to me he's marginalized or not given some important roles to some of the left-leaning councillors. And I think I said before on the point that the mayor's first task is to get all those councillors working to their best strengths so that everybody feels that they're contributing at a high level. And so I think he has a little bit of work to go on that, but so far I like what I see.
John, Doug Ford came within 5 or 6 points of beating John Tory, and had the campaign lasted another week or two, it seemed that Doug was catching up. It could have overtaken. How do you see Tory's mandate, given how close Doug Ford came from way back of the pack?
He's the mayor. He has a full mandate. That's just the way it works. That being said, the interesting parts of how he got there speaks to something that Sheila mentioned, and that's that John Tory wasn't chosen so much as John Tory as the alternative to the Fords. Now, that's not unusual in any government situation. If an incumbent is running, and with Rob's sickness, the reality is his brother stood in, and and in a very short period of time ran a campaign of his own, but not of his own. So it's a very complicated thing, except for to say, I think everybody would agree that there were two campaigns. There was the campaign to re-elect the Fords, one of them, and there was a campaign to stop the Fords, the circus, the monstrosity in the eyes of many people. That's not my view, but the people who believed that they wanted to stop the Fords at all costs, they had a choice between other candidates, and they very quickly, in the dying days of the campaign, figured out that there was one person who could do it credibly, and that was John Tory.
We got a few minutes left. I'd like to canvass your thoughts on top stories for 2015. What should we be looking at? Federally, provincial, municipal? Start with you, John.
Well, I'll go for the wild card that Doug Ford decides the day before the London debate and throws his hat into the leadership race for the Conservatives, because I think that's the prediction that no one else is going to make in Ontario. So I'll go for that one. Failing that, next year, 2015, it's all federal. The federal election, the unions have amassed a fortune to defeat the Conservative government. The Conservative government has been working hard since it got elected, actually, to get reelected. And it's going to be a clash of the titans of those interests next year. With really the question is, do the third party groups, do the unions, do they achieve federally what they've been able to do in Ontario? And that's eliminate democracy and take over the government.
Well, I think some people will take issue with that. Sheila?
Locally, we're all going to be looking to watch that gridlock magically disappear now that the King streetcar rear doors are going to open for folks. It's all going to be transit, and whether there's measurable improvements month to month, are we going to see some easing up of the traffic in Toronto, I think. On provincial level, I believe there's still more skullduggery to come out around the gas plants and all the errant spending, the billions of dollars. And that was the biggest shocker for me in the provincial election, is how forgiving the Ontario public was over all those malfeasances.
I think that it's an interesting question. I don't know that they've forgiven or forgotten, but I think at the end of the day, you have to have an alternative. And I think that was the big misstep of the provincial campaign, is that Tim Hudak missed it. He had a natural, easy way to defeat them, and he decided to have his own policy and talk about his own basket of issues. And if he'd stayed away from that, then I think he could have been the premier today. But instead of that, so I think that's where the last election is. It's a Liberal win, but how they got the win. You asked the question about John Tory and his mandate. The premier's absolutely historic win, but mandate, I don't think the people forgave the Liberal Party for what they did. But they've got 4 years more to forget. That's the issue.
Right, and there's nothing we can do about it as a parliament and provincially.
Well, Sheila White, John Mykytyshyn, thank you. Look forward to having you back in the new year. We'll talk some more politics.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. We'll be back with a final thought on The Point. It's the holiday season, and a time when people make an extra effort to be nice. Festive greetings, holiday parties, and gift exchange are the norm at this time of year. Yet when it comes to politics, there's always a Scrooge. This year, Prime Minister Stephen Harper appears to have taken on this moniker. Many people have their own reasons why the Prime Minister deserves this title, but of late, one issue has propelled him to the top of this list. It's Harper's refusal to meet with Premier Kathleen Wynne for more than a year. The Prime Minister has had opportunities to meet and host international leaders. While he's found time to meet with other premiers, Canada's most populous province and the economic engine of this country doesn't seem to warrant his time. Harper has made his disdain for Liberals known. He openly called for Tim Hudak's election to replace former Premier McGuinty and the Liberals. But, like it or not, the voters of this province picked Wynne and the Liberals to govern Ontario for the next 4 years, and nothing Harper can do can change that. Federal-provincial relations have always been frosty, and Ontarians have a preference for electing different parties federally and provincially. But they still expect both governments to work together to improve the province. With a myriad of issues facing both levels of government, one would think that there would be many reasons to meet, discuss, and agree on a course of action. Infrastructure, investments, job creation, and pensions are just a few of the issues that can benefit from a coordinated federal-provincial approach. Yet that does not appear to be happening. It's time that Harper get with the program and meet with Wynne. She has even offered to meet him in Ottawa, despite his often visits to the Ontario capital. If we want to have a competitive economy, then we need all levels of government rowing in the same direction. It's time for Harper to stop playing Scrooge and show his better side and meet with wit. And that's the point. That's all for this show and this season of The Point. Follow us on Twitter at WatchThePoint, like us on Facebook, and check out our podcast at watchthepoint.libsyn.com. I'm Marcel Wieder. Have a happy holiday, and thank you for watching.